I was raised to believe grief was private. It was something you carried quietly, something you learned to manage without letting it spill into shared spaces. Pain was considered a personal responsibility, not a communal experience. You were allowed to feel it, but only in controlled doses and behind closed doors. Public strength mattered more than private honesty. In my culture, endurance was praised more than expression. Tears were acceptable only for a short time, and even then, they were expected to be discreet. The message was clear from an early age: feel deeply, but don't let anyone see it. Vulnerability was mistaken for weakness, and asking for help was seen as a failure to cope. Neighbors were part of this unspoken agreement. We greeted each other politely, exchanged small talk about weather or errands, and then retreated into our separate lives. We knew each other's routines, not each other's stories. Community existed, but it stayed shallow, careful not to cross emotional boundaries. There was comfort in that distance. It made life predictable. You didn't have to explain yourself or carry someone else's pain. Everyone was assumed to be managing just fine, even when they weren't. Silence became a shared language, one that protected privacy, but also hid suffering. Growing up, I watched adults navigate loss with quiet dignity. They returned to work quickly. They avoided long conversations about what hurt. They kept their composure in public and released their pain only in private moments, if at all. That became my blueprint for grief long before I ever experienced it myself. So when loss finally entered my life, I followed the script I had been given. I minimized my pain. I reassured others that I was okay. I avoided conversations that might invite sympathy. I believed I was being strong, responsible, mature. I didn't realize I was slowly isolating myself. The world around me didn't pause for my grief. It moved forward at its usual pace, indifferent to the fact that my internal landscape had been completely altered. Emails kept arriving. Deadlines remained unchanged. Responsibilities didn't soften because my heart was broken. Bills still showed up in the mailbox, reminding me that grief doesn't come with exemptions. Rent was still due. Groceries still needed to be bought. Life demanded functionality even when I felt barely functional. The disconnect between my inner world and external expectations was exhausting. At work, productivity was treated as proof of recovery. As long as I showed up and completed tasks, no one questioned how I was doing. I learned quickly that grief was tolerated only as long as it didn't interfere with performance. Pain was acceptable, but inconvenience was not. People told me I was handling things well. They admired my composure. They said I was strong. Each compliment felt like pressure, a reminder to keep my grief contained. I nodded, smiled, and played the role expected of me, even when it felt like I was lying. Behind closed doors, everything unraveled. The moment I stepped into my apartment, the weight returned. Silence pressed in from every direction. Without witnesses, my grief expanded, filling every room. I cried, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of crying that leaves you drained and hollow. Living in an apartment building made the loneliness sharper. I was surrounded by people, separated by thin walls, yet completely disconnected. I heard laughter, footsteps, doors opening and closing. Life continued all around me, while mine felt paused, suspended in pain. There is a unique loneliness that comes from being unseen in a crowded place. It's not the absence of people that hurts, but the absence of connection. Knowing that help is physically close, but emotionally distant, makes the isolation feel intentional, even when it isn't. I began to realize how loneliness can exist even in environments designed for proximity. Cities, buildings, neighborhoods bring people together physically, but rarely emotionally. We coexist without truly connecting, assuming everyone else is fine because they appear to be. Society often celebrates independence, especially emotional independence. We are taught to self-regulate, self-soothe, and self-heal. Relying on others is framed as weakness, something to outgrow rather than embrace. In grief, that mindset can be deeply damaging. I felt guilty for wanting support. I told myself others had their own problems, their own losses, their own stress. I didn't want to add to anyone's burden, so I kept quiet, convincing myself that silence was kindness, that endurance was generosity. But silence has consequences. Without space to express grief, it doesn't disappear. It turns inward. It becomes heavier, more complicated. What begins as sadness can grow into numbness, anxiety, or despair when it's left unacknowledged for too long. I noticed changes in myself that I couldn't easily explain. My patience thinned. My sleep became irregular. I felt detached from conversations that once mattered to me. I went through motions without feeling present, like I was observing my life from a distance. Loneliness began to layer itself over grief. It wasn't just about missing someone anymore. It was about feeling disconnected from everyone. The loss had created a gap not only in my heart, but in my relationships, my routines, my sense of belonging. People assumed that because I lived among others, I wasn't truly alone. But loneliness isn't about physical isolation. It's about emotional absence. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible, unheard, untouched. There is a social discomfort around grief that makes people keep their distance. Many don't know what to say. Others fear saying the wrong thing, so they choose silence, thinking it's respectful, realizing it can feel like abandonment. I don't blame them. Our society doesn't teach us how to sit with pain. We are taught to fix, to distract, to move forward. Grief doesn't fit neatly into those frameworks. It lingers. It disrupts. It makes people uncomfortable. As time passed, fewer people checked in, not because they didn't care, but because they assumed I had adjusted. Grief has an expiration date in the public eye. Once enough time passes, it's expected that you've moved on. That expectation made me question my own healing. I wondered if I was doing something wrong because the pain was still there. I felt pressure to perform recovery, to appear functional even when I wasn't ready. Living in that tension was exhausting. I was constantly negotiating between what I felt and what was expected of me, between my need for connection and my fear of being seen as weak or needy. Isolation became a habit. I stopped reaching out altogether. It felt safer to manage my pain alone than to risk misunderstanding or dismissal. But safety came at the cost of connection, and the cost was high. Loneliness slowly became its own form of grief. I mourned not only the person I lost, but the sense of community I realized I had never truly had. I grieved the idea that suffering would naturally bring people closer. It took time to understand that this loneliness wasn't a personal failure. It was a reflection of broader social patterns, of how modern life prioritizes efficiency over empathy, privacy over presence. We live close to each other, yet far apart emotionally. We share buildings, streets, and routines, but rarely share our inner worlds. Grief exposes that gap in painful clarity. Looking back, I see how deeply these cultural expectations shaped my experience. They taught me to hide when I needed to be held, to endure when I needed support, and in doing so, they turned grief into something heavier than it ever needed to be.